Hello and welcome to this seminar talk about the situation for freedom of speech in Myanmar, or the country we quite recently used to call Burma. I think both terms will be used here today. We have seen a very difficult development in Myanmar over the past year. There was a military coup in February, and the period of about 10 years that the country has had before that, where journalists and writers has been able to work quite freely, not totally, as we probably will hear later, but quite freely, has been terminated, and the situation is back to what it was a decade and a half ago, you could say. We will talk about this situation and learn more about what's going on in the country right now and what's been going on over the past month and years. To have this conversation, I have with me three persons. First of all, on a link from Bangkok is Mikael Hauer, who is the head of the Asia desk at the Olof Palme International Center in Sweden, but you are based in Bangkok, and it is probably like midnight for you now, so you are excused if you fall asleep. And then we have Helena Thorfinn, who is a Swedish writer, and you've been working in Myanmar for 4 years before this, and you have just published your book, Munkens, skugga, In the Shadow of the Monk. You will read a few pages from that one later on in this conversation. And then we have Lian Sakhong, who is born, and you've been working in Burma as well for the past 10 years now, and you are a part of the, I said exile government, but you said it's not exile government because it's government, actually. But government working under quite difficult circumstances right now, you could say. You're very welcome. First of all, I would like to ask you, Mikael, you've been working with this country for quite some time now, and I know that you were in the country when the military coup was. Can you describe what it's like right now? What has happened recently in the country for freedom of speech?
Thank you, Jesper, and thank you also, Bonnier, for organizing this seminar. I'm happy to be here. Yes, I will try to answer your question, and feel free to break in if you think I'm sliding off topic here. I was trying to prepare, and it's always difficult to know if people have some knowledge ahead of the seminar about Burma and so on, but I will give my picture of the situation right now. So let's start even before the coup. There was, as you said, they were working quite freely as journalists, but media freedom and freedom of expression was not fully accessed even during the previous civilian government. I think we all probably remember the two Reuters journalists that was more or less set up in a drama with police and secret documents and so on, and they had to spend more than 500 days in prison before they were released in an amnesty. We also know from the previous government that they were using the judicial system to limit journalists and media houses to do investigations of certain to do investigations of sensitive issues. There were frequently lawsuits using defamation or other type of penal codes that sort of dragged on to a long lawsuit that will, keep journalists off the street and keep them not investigating in certain topics. I think we will come back later on to the ethnic media, which is, let's say, a chapter of its own. They have also been harassed to some extent during these previous years before coup, and they also had to conquer another situation which is quite hard, namely the commercialization of the media landscape in Burma during these years. So trying to rely on private funding to sustain their operations. Anyway, so Going back to the coup, as you all know, it happened early on in February, and I think the junta understood immediately that if they want this coup to be successful, they need to control the narrative of what's going on. Immediately, they started talking about election fraud. They arrested Aung San Suu Kyi and the president, and starting accusing them of breaking the law. This was all kind of a setup to make them justify their coup to actually be within the frame of the constitution, which of course is complete nonsense. But they understood this very, very early on. I mean, as soon as they started cracking down on the protesters, they also hired Israeli Canadian lobbyists named Arben Menashe. I'm a little bit uncertain about the pronunciation of the last name, who was hired to tell or to show the world or to broadcast to the world the real situation in Myanmar. They also managed to get CNN, and I think Al Jazeera was also on the trip, to actually come to Myanmar, to be embedded in the military as they was going around trying to show them the real situation in Yangon. And of course, this also sparked a discussion about ethics when it comes to journalism and so on. So I think they were prepared to control the narrative and to make sure that they can control the information which is being spread inside the country, but also outside of Myanmar. So yeah, probably that could be a good starting point, and then we can go more in depth.
Yeah, thank you very much. Helena or Lian, feel free to comment on this. Do you share this picture of what's been going on for the past year?
Yes.
Take the microphone here. Yes.
Yes. Exactly, Michael. It was quite interesting to see. I was in Myanmar from 2014 to 2018, and the situation for journalists first, when I touched ground, I connected to the Myanmar Pen Society and to journalists and to journalist schools. And in the beginning, there was great optimism, and everyone was sort of saying that we will have a completely new training of journalists here. We have a complete new industry here, and there was great hopes, obviously, since that's one of the first pillars of a democracy to have that in place. But quite soon, I would say almost in 2015-16, it started to come noises that the journalists weren't working as freely as we'd hoped. And then the big divide came with the two Reuters journalists that were seized under. They were using a drone, right, or something. They were using a drone filming in Rakhine, and this was used as a way to detain them. So that was when we first started to feel uncomfortable, or people who were staying there, and said that there were signals that things were not developing the right way. And after that was, at least as I saw it, after that, it was like a change of tone from the government towards journalists. Would you agree,
Yes, I think what happening from 2010 to 2020 was a lot of people were very, very optimistic. But in reality, the transition was happening under 2008 Constitution, which was drafted and adopted by the military. So according to the 2008 Constitution, all the freedom that they are given is actually they can take back away anytime they want. So the real power still was in the hands of the military, not in elected government. So the transition period, democratic transition period that we saw from 2008 to 2020 was democracy only in terms of election, nothing else. Everything else was controlled by the military, actually. So that's the reason why, although there was 2 elections, and then both government tried to change the law, but they could not do, because 25% of parliament vote was controlled by the military. So they cannot change any significant law. All the laws that passed by the military in previous period, and then those laws which is meant to be prevent human right, media freedom and everything was still exist during those short period in 10 years. So as soon as their power is threatened, then they pick up that law again, and as we see in all these journalists. So the freedom was not the genuine one.
Yeah. As far as I understand it, there was a couple of reforms which made people positive, as you say, about 10 years ago. And before that period, a lot of media organizations was created and operated from exile, and they went back to Yangon and in Myanmar. But still there was some restrictions, as Mikael mentioned. Am I right to say that many of these restrictions was about writing about the ethnic conflicts in the country?
Well, I think the restriction was so long as they do not threaten the power of military, it was quite free. They even wrote about ethnic situation quite openly, because I went back in 2012 as part of peace negotiation. I was a chief negotiator for ethnic arms organizations. So every time media interviewed me quite a lot, and then during that period, I also published quite a number of books, so which we could do it. But that times we also realized that the change is not genuine. But what we hope was, in terms of civil societies, including media, was quite open. So that might brings the real change. But underneath of that change, I think everything was still the control of the military. And then that's the reason why during this peace negotiation, what we tried to do during those years was try to change the law, try to change the constitution. That was our focus. But the peace process itself was started in officially in 2013, and 2013 to 2020. Whenever we try to change a genuine democratic principle and federal principle, when we try to bring, then the military always block. So that was, we could not do a genuine change.
I would absolutely agree on your analysis there, that it was all press freedom where things didn't hurt, I mean, it was quite easy to write about restaurants and new things happening and so on. But as soon as it became hairy, which is around the ethnic minorities and the peace negotiations, that's where it was not so easy to write anymore. I absolutely agree. And then questions about the fact that exile media moved in. Maybe they did that too early, perhaps. In this retrospect, we could say that. I don't know if you agree on that, but I mean, but I think there's now a new move towards Chiang Mai, for instance.
Because I was coming to that, and maybe Mikael also knows about this, but what are they doing now? Because many people went back. They were trained as journalists in Norway, for example, or living in Chiang Mai, working as journalists from there, or London, or all over the world, actually, and they came back to Myanmar. Are they still there? Are they in prison now, or what has happened to them?
Yeah, that's what I thought was interesting with this discussion now, because we actually had a major release of prisoners just 2 days ago, and I saw the list, and there's at least a few hundred journalists that were detained that are now released. So I don't know if you've heard anything, Michael, about what they are telling about their time in prison and their plan. What I've heard is they've been forced to sign a document that they would never ever do anything against the military. I don't know if that's true, Michael. I guess you got more recent information than I do.
Well, it's definitely a standard procedure from the police and the military that people are asked to sign these kind of waivers for them to be released from prison. I also heard some concerning reports about this amnesty, that people were actually re-arrested basically as they were leaving the prison. So they came out and then they were arrested again and moved back. I'm not sure who this was or how many, but I read some report yesterday on this. And I think, just to go back to your question, Jesper, so what does people do now? I think already back in 2010, there was as Lian was saying, there was an optimism, people were moving back. It might have been too early, it might have not have been, but I think that it was also sort of a divider. So some journalists and other civil society movements, they moved back 2012, 2013 to work within the system. But there was also a diaspora or an exile organizations that actually said, no, we will not move back because it's impossible to change things within the 2008 constitution. So actually, some of the civil society organization, and I think some of the media houses, have always kept one foot still in the border areas, either on the Thai side or just the inside of Myanmar, as a backup, because I think they knew that this scenario was maybe not likely, but it was it was possible that it would go, that all of this progress was later on revoked.
I see. Lian, you nodded before.
I think, as Michael said, I think first the release of the prisoners. You know, I myself was arrested 3 times between 1988 and 1990. So I was a student, one of the student leaders in 1988 movement. So I know the situation that I think this is repeating itself. Every time before they release us, they ask us to sign some papers, but their main purpose is they release us, but they follow us. So who I contact with, what kind of activities we are doing. So they try to, wipe out a bigger network. Sometimes they release and then arrest it again. So yesterday, as soon as they released, for example, Munkens, who is a writer, journalist, and then also prominent leader of NLD. He was arrested and then he was released, but within a few hours, he was arrested again with the person who greeted him, not only him. So they try to, catch, arrest those who are surrounding them. So that is kind of the military tactic that they are always using. So somehow I'm pleased to know that, for example, my very good friends, journalist, Myanmar Media, Tintin Ong was released, and some of our friends, those who have been working since 1988, they are released. I'm happy, but on the other hand, I'm not totally optimistic, the whole picture.
Tell me, I was wondering about the situation now for internet and social media. The first times I went to Burma in the late 90s, there was hardly any internet. You had to go to a few internet cafes, and almost every page you wanted to visit was blocked for some reason. There was a black site saying this site is blocked because of improper material. And then a few things happened over the following years, but then after like 2008 and forward, there has been a massive development with internet, with spread of internet, and also use of Facebook, not the least. I think like 80% of the population was connected to Facebook previously. Has it been closed down now, or is it still a method for communication, or how can people use it?
I think they can still use it, although they closed down some big network like with the government is controlling. But people are very clever now. I really don't know how they do it, but they still there is a lot of internet activities. So if this internet power is, I think, so big for this movement, to compare with 1988, for example. In 1988, we took the street, demonstrate, do something on the whole day on the street, but we did not know what happened in the other side of the town. In the evening, we went home and listened BBC radio, and then we knew, something also is happening in Yangon, Mandalay, and other towns. But now we constantly can see everything what is happening alive. And then this demonstration is still continuing. And then even in remote area, small villages, people are gathering, demonstrating with their signposts and so on. So this is still powerful. Every day still coming up now. So I think internet, yes, they block, they shut down a lot, but still this activity is still alive. I think this is still very powerful.
But there's a sinister side to this as well, because of first of all, the way hate speech has been spreading on Facebook. It's one of the major culprits of the human rights abuses in Rakhine State, for instance, and that's been quite well documented and is still being documented. Actually, just the other week, a judge in America is asking Facebook to release documents proving, exactly how the nods and the bots and so on worked. So this is probably, we're going to hear more about that. It's also something I discuss in my book. So there's a sinister side to Facebook. And to this day, what I notice in my Facebook flow is, first of all, that some of the writers have changed names or added, they've changed their names or they're called something else. Suddenly I realize that this person is actually that person and so on, so that you can actually use, you anonymize yourself as an actor. And that it's also used, as you say, to mobilize the resistance, but it's also used by the military to track people. So it has that side to it that the government has used, for instance, groups from ethnic minorities to actually track people down. So it's very much a sword with two sides to it. That's very clear.
I agree. Military also is using, because all the internet and everything's telephone companies and everything is mostly controlled by the military or their family crony. So I think, for example, MPT, all the SIM cards, maybe they can easily track down those who are, and it is quite dangerous, but people are very, determined and committed for the cause. So no matter what, we'll continue. Will fight till the end of the. We cannot tolerate anymore these regimes. We don't want to go back to this dark age. We don't want to go back to this military dictatorship. So we have to fight on. So till today, this is still a very powerful tools. Internet is. So that's Myanmar and these regimes. They undermine the power of the people, and then the modern people, how we can use technology, and. We are not only using this internet and demonstration. For example, all the workers, the whole country, 80% of the workers are now what we call is engaged in CDM, civil disobedience movement. So they are not working for the government. They boycott everything. So I think that is also is very powerful. So, for example, the government, the public workers, 80% are not working under military regime anymore. They register with us under NUG government. So this is the difference.
But when you say that you have seen writers and others changing names, which means that they are still in the country and they're still able to work somehow? Or?
Yes, I mean, we've been working with Swedish Pen to do a Myanmar edition with writers. So we are in touch with a whole group of writers in Myanmar, outside of Myanmar. And we've been a bit surprised how bold people are, that they want to be published with their names, but then when you contact them, they have another name on internet, on Facebook, which is probably a clever move. But we've been surprised that we've been offering to say, look, you can publish anonymously, that might be a good idea. But they're sort of so fierce, and so angry that they know I want to be there with my name. So that's one. I think that's a good sign in a way, is it? Or I don't know how to interpret that. But, electronically, they don't want to be traced, but they want to stand with their identity. But just to comment a little bit, I moved to Myanmar 2014, and when we came to Myanmar, I didn't have a mobile phone because the mobile phones were so expensive, or the actual SIM cards cost $2,000. So there was I arrived in August, and so for the first 2 months, we didn't have SIM cards in the family because it was too expensive. So we had to arrange everything, like you did in the olden days, like people had to be in time and stuff like that. But then quite quickly, 2014 in November, that's when Telenor started to, and Ooredoo started to roll out their huge nets. And the exponential growth of the mobile net is unprecedented. It's unlike anything else in the world. And I would actually, what I hear, Michael, I don't know if you hear something else, but it's actually more than 100% of the population that now has Facebook because they have double identities and they have more. So it's actually more people than the population that has a Facebook account. And there was a time, almost for 1 or 2 years, when you spoke to people in Myanmar about Facebook, you said, yeah, are you, you have a mobile, you have internet? Or you ask and say, no, I don't have internet, I have Facebook. So that was the, and that's almost still the case, isn't it? I mean, internet and Facebook is the same.
Yeah, right.
While WhatsApp, Instagram, and all the other platforms were not prevalent when I was there.
One of the reasons that Facebook was so popular was that, the Burmese text is very difficult to, type and so on. And then only the Unicode that the Burmese, there are several kind of typing system, but only the Unicode was allowed to use on the internet. And then that is very, I think, Facebook is very good for that Unicode. So that's why Facebook is so popular. But others like, that is two types and two, you cannot read, you can send text, but it's difficult to read. So I think that's the reason Facebook is so popular.
Yeah, but we actually saw during 2015 and 2016 how the language and the pictures and the hatred started to come. I mean, we followed all these lovely pages with Magic Myanmar and My Lovely Burma and so on, with tourist pictures, and the tourists were starting to come into the country, pizzerias were opening. It was a completely optimistic atmosphere around the country, and that was reflected on Facebook. But then slowly 2015-16, that's where it started to come more and more hate speech, and suddenly we saw in these apps, we saw pictures of Muslims with a bomb in their turban or in their and women in burqas being everywhere, and it was pictures of pigs, and it was all terrible. And then it started to come more and more and more and more, and that was actually precedenting the genocide in Rakhine State, where the hatred against Muslims were whipped up. So that's what I saw with my own face, so to speak, my own eyes.
Well, this hate speech maybe more now, because everyone, the whole country, hate Min Aung Hlaing and his regime. So, insulting Min Aung Hlaing, the military coup leader, and then all the military. So you can see every day, everywhere. Now this is excused now because of the situation.
It's interesting to hear that, as you describe, Helena, that people are taking up new pen names, because that's an old tradition in Myanmar to do that. People during the colonial period, when they were afraid of the British secret police, they also always took pen names, and they wrote under another name in the papers. And actually, George Orwell was, when he was young and called Eric Blair, which was his real name, he worked in Burma as a police officer, and when he came back from there in 1925, he took up the tradition of using a pen name, which he learned in Burma, and called himself George Orwell. So it's amazing to see that people use it again to be able to write without actually showing their real identity. Mikael, tell me, you work with projects, and you have, of course, had to change a lot of that, but how do you communicate now with? Is it possible to work inside the country?
Well, depending on your definition of work, of course, everything is now much more complicated, and we have to be very cautious of what we do and how we communicate. But we have been able to establish secure communication ways with our partners. Yeah, so we have, I mean, it's not as convenient as using email, and you can attach all kind of documents and so on. We have to work now in a much smarter way. But yes, it's possible. We have a few apps that we can use, which we feel it's quite secure, and it's also apps that work with the limited bandwidth that our partners in Burma can use. But I would say that previously we had probably a ratio where 75 to 80% of the budget would go to activities and organizing different kind of things, and 20% would be salaries and admin. And well, I wouldn't say it's the reverse now, but the costs of keeping people safe, of keeping information safe, of communicating in a safe way, it's so much more cumbersome. So we have to spend a lot more time and effort and actually also money on setting up secure systems. But there is still activity being implemented, and we still try to be at least hopeful to keep status quo in a few areas. But yeah, it's very, very difficult, of course.
I want to change topic a little bit, but it's all connected to this freedom of speech issue. Myanmar is a very diversified country with a lot of ethnic groups and a lot of languages and a lot of different cultures and cultural history. And one of the issues during all these decades of conflict has been whether the ethnic minorities will be allowed to have their own culture and their own languages. Can you describe a little bit more about that? Because I think it's interesting from a PEN point of view. We work a lot with the right of ethnic minorities to keep the languages.
Yes, I think that is very important area. That Burma, as you said, is a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multilingual country. So many language groups are there. So, but whenever they say, for example, the constitution, even back in 1947 when we practiced parliamentary democracy, and then military came first in 1962, 62 to 74 was direct military rule, 74 to 88 was the same military, but in the name of socialism, they ruled the country, and then military came back. So all these years, sometimes they say, even in their constitution, saying that there is a freedom of speech. But freedom of what language? That is not a problem. You can speak freely, but not in your language. You have to speak in Burmese or Myanmar. So that is the problem. For example, I'm a Chin, a Christian, and I'm Myanmar or Myanmar is not my language, my original language. So, but when we were in primary school, a kid, we are not allowed to learn our Chin language. So luckily we are Christian. So where did I learn my language? Only at Sunday school. And then others, there was no media, no newspaper, no radio, no television in Chin. So the only literature that we have is the Bible, the hymn books, and then Sunday school materials. Even those, for example, until 2010, I must say, until 2010, the Bible was not freely, we are not able to print inside the country, except the Myanmar, majority Myanmar language. For example, the Chin Bible usually was printed in India and then smuggled into our country. That is the question. So there was, maybe they say, the law say, there is freedom of speech, but in which language? Only in Burmese. So in the court, in the school, everywhere, we are not allowed. And then as in 2010 to 2020, there was a little bit more of openness. But that time, the law still prohibited. So when you go and register ethnic media, it is double difficult compared to the Myanmar and English. So that is the situation that we are facing. So I think the country problems, why we ethnic group are fighting for 70 years, armed conflict, is that we, in order to prevent ourselves, the right to exist, the right to practice our culture, our language, this is what we are struggling for. So against this struggle, what the government from 1947 to till today, the way they practice is the so-called nation building process. So the nation building process in terms of one religion, so they promulgated Buddhism as a state religion. That is the reason why Muslim Rohingya are persecuted, Chin Christian are persecuted, Kachin Karen Christian are persecuted. And then that is the religions since 1961. And then followed by this religion is language. And in language is what they call is national language policy, adopted by General Ne Win in 1966. Since then, we are not allowed to learn or to promote or to protect our language. And then finally, in 1989, this is one ethnicity. In terms of one in this country, there must be only one ethnic group to be recognized. So the country name was changed from Burma to Myanmar. Myanmar is a majority ethnic group. I'm not Myanmar. I do not speak Myanmarska. So in terms of religion, in terms of language, in terms of ethnicity, this is how they try to manipulate, they try to influence, they try to control the whole country, and by eliminating other ethnic groups. Our language, our culture, even our identity and our ethnicity.
Yeah, no, that's just a comment for people who haven't followed Myanmar for that long. That what's happening now is that the military is turning against the Bama majority. So for many ethnic groups, the persecution has been going on, and nothing is actually new. To be a bit blunt, this is what's been going on forever. In many parts of the country. So, but just a comment. I realized this didn't have but during this window that opened a little bit, 2014, 2016, there were attempts, at least from international actors, to try to open up. So I was actually working on a project for UNICEF and UNESCO that wanted to create instruction material in ethnic languages for children. And that was a push I understood that was completely new when there was a conference about this, how you actually work in ethnic languages in schools. So there was a little window that now has brutally been closed again.
No, it's being closed again.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right.
I mean, now it's brutal. I mean, we have to understand that the little opening that was happening was brutally closed.
Yeah.
Just compare how we are suffering under these military regimes and others, all these the governments in Burma. For example, the Grand people, they have a high school in the Grand language during colonial period till 1948. That high school was closed down, and then the level of learning was reduced into primary, and then eventually even primary level was not allowed. And for example, with the Chin, we have that privilege also under colonial period. And then unfortunately, we the Chin are divided into two countries. One part becomes Chin state in Burma, another part becomes Mizoram state in India. So if you compare these two areas, now we are not allowed to learn even our language at primary level. But in Mizoram, in India, our language you can study at the master level in university. So this is how, under democracy and under military dictatorship, how things can be different within one ethnic group. So that is
I want to open up for questions if you have from the floor, and I will repeat them in the microphone for the recording to be correct. If anyone has anything to ask, please do so. It's a very quiet audience here. Okay, think about it. Mikael, what's your comment on this ethnic language and culture issue?
No, I think my fellow panelists have already given you a good picture of the situation. I think the Burmanization of the country has been going on for very long. It's been very strategic. I think that NLD, the civilian government, did not do enough. Instead, they were actually upholding the tradition that was established by the military to have a very centralistic government. So even though there is states which do their own elections and have their own parliaments, they were not allowed to elect their own union leader or their own state leader. I can't remember the exact title, but basically the prime minister of the state would be appointed by Naypyidaw. And that would almost always be, you know, an NLD Bamar person coming in and basically, you know, running a government which has not been elected, which is, yeah, seems like a very undemocratic way of running things. And this has been, you know, if you take political sector by sector, so health, education, media, etc., you would see that this Burmanization has been a central policy across the board in all states. So I think there is a reason also to criticize the civilian government. They didn't do enough. I think within the framework of 2008 constitution, they could have changed some of this because it only needed a single majority. So they would not have to rely on military votes in the parliament. So yeah, I think this has been the discrimination has been going on for decades, basically since independence. And now I think, as Helena and Liam has pointed out, now it's a golden opportunity. Now I think the awakening among the Bamar people has created what do you say? A support for ethnic communities. That this is what you have been telling us all of these years, but we never quite believed you. We didn't think this could happen to us, but now it is. So I'm hoping this sense of unity will really live on through this difficult process that Liam is leading, for example, with a new constitution, and, you know, getting a very participatory process ongoing, and that everyone can, you know, keep focus on the higher objective and not get stuck in the details. That's something very difficult, but I feel optimistic at this point.
Yeah. I think I totally agree with Mikhail's observations, and then even under this the so-called democratic government from 2010 to 2020, every time you see, you know, the government, for example, that time a little bit, there was a little change, and then there was, for example, in my state, Chin state government, Chin state parliament, and so on. But who is the most powerful guy? The prime minister appointed from Naypyidaw, and then another most powerful guy is border area minister, who always will be the military guy. So I think still, even under those democratically elected period government, we still did not enjoy our right. But now I think, as like Mikhail, I'm so much optimistic about the situation, despite of all these difficulties and despite of all this atrocity. Because I was involved in peace process, as I said, we would like to bring democracy and federalism. So in order to change 2008 constitution, we tried to adopt and then agree democratic principle and federal principle. But in 8 years, we could not agree important principle at all. But after the military coup, with these CRPH and elected MPs and so on, we sit together, or sit meaning online. This is freedom of the power of internet also. And we discuss. Within 2 weeks, we could agree a federal charter that we proposed in 2013 already. Most of the principles that we proposed during all these years were agreed within 2 weeks. So that's we adopted as our charter now. Based on that charter, we are now governing the country. And then just compare, for example, in 1962, when the first military coup came, all the ethnic groups in Burma, these ethnic groups, for example, people think that we are just minority group. But if you look the map of Burma, 60% of the country territories belongs to ethnic groups, various ethnic groups together. So those ethnic groups all demanded in 1962 to change the constitution based on federalism. But the military came, no Burma was supporting us. So, and then in 88, we came together. I was student leader. In terms of democracy, we all are united. But as soon as we speak about federalism and ethnic equality, then we are divided. So that was the reason that 88 was not successful. But now, 2021, the whole country demanding both federalism and democracy. So I think this gives me a lot of hope. This gives us a lot of hope for the future. Yes.
Well, I feel I'm the party pooper here. I'm curious. I'm not as optimistic at all. Michael, I'm curious about your analysis. How can you be optimistic?
Well,
I mean,
never. I mean,
unless you're a very optimistic person by nature, because I mean, because I'm very involved and I don't see any. Unfortunately, I'm not sharing that view at all.
That's good.
well, what I'm optimistic about is that there is now a sense of unity. I would say the question mark would be for me: is this unity only based on the concept of having a common enemy, or is it the unity that actually it's about creating an inclusive federal democratic state?
But the military is not interested in that.
I think it's my optimism. Let me tell you, we are going to defeat this military because they are powerful right now. For example, today, hundreds of military convoys marching to my capital, Chin State. So this is, if you look the scene, it is terrifying. But compared to other times, the whole country is united not only in terms of the purpose, but also in terms of the way we are conducting ourselves. In the past 70 years, only ethnic groups are holding arms and fighting against this military regime. But now the whole country is holding arms and fighting against this military regime in the name of PDF, People Defense Forces. I think they cannot kill 50 million people. So everywhere they have enemy. So militarily they cannot defeat us. And then in terms of financially, they don't have resources enough. And for example, if I compare, we also formed a government in exile in 1990s, but now we form. Within 2 months, we can mobilize the people, the whole country, and then not only inside the country, but also overseas Burmese community. In 88, we did not have overseas Burmese community. Now, because of 88 movement, millions of Burmese communities in America, Europe, and then Australia, Canada. So they all are mobilized and they contributed in terms of financially, in terms of everything. So within 2-3 weeks, we are able to raise funding, our government. Within a few months, several $1 million. So I think we have a lot of optimism.
Okay, thank you. We have 2 questions. We take them in a row. Over there first.
Thank you very much. My name is Esther Nilsson, and I'm not so familiar with Myanmar, Burma. But I do wonder if you could say something about the role of Aung San Suu Kyi now. Where is she in all of this? And does she hold any power to count on at all, or any role in any development towards democracy again? And then my second question was hearing from what you're saying here and the degree of optimism, perhaps. And do I also hear that you see the solution for democracy in the future to go through armed conflict? Thank you.
And then Hannah.
Okay, so my question is for you, Helena. As you mentioned, you are the guest editor of Pen Op's issue on Myanmar, and you were also mentioning the brave contributions of the writers in this issue. And I was wondering if you have received any feedback on the effects of these texts, or it was just published. What do you expect? What are your hopes for the effect or feedback from these writers?
Excellent questions, and good that you took up. I was actually going to ask you to say a few more words about this special edition of Pen Up. So you can do that in the same time. But first, the questions to Lian.
Okay, thank you for the question. What is the role of Aung San Suu Kyi? I think Aung San Suu Kyi still is a big symbol for our movement. And of course, he is now arrested. Well, we don't know where they put her. We don't know. Sometimes she appears on the court. That's what we all know. But the people, as soon as this movement came, all the streets, when people demonstrate, they bring her pictures all over the country. So she still is a big symbol of democracy in our country. Still, people call her as the mother of democracy. I think she still meant a lot for the people still. That is one thing. And then in terms of bringing back democracy, we start our demonstration peacefully on the street. And then all the public workers, they engage civil disobedience very peacefully, non-violently. But the military came on the street and arrested, killing the people on the street. And then arrested all the CDMers and put them in the jail or killed them. So people start holding arms and fight again to defend themselves. This fighting is self-defensive. So I think this is, but for us, we are not applying only one method. This armed struggle is only for self-defensive. But we are going to bring our country the change in various ways, not only one way, various ways. So, for example, my ministry, I'm installed as a minister of federal affairs unions. So my ministry work is try to bring democratic federal constitution. So we are preparing, but of course, constitution cannot be written or drafted without the participation of the people. So we are preparing, but the good thing with this internet is almost every night we are able to consult with the people, various stakeholders, and then we are constantly having the meeting, having consultations. So I think that the people's desire for democracy, a peaceful change is very, very strong. But since the military are so brutal in killing people, people are defending themselves. This is not the only means that we are going to defeat it. But I think financially, the financial institution is totally broken. The administration mechanism is totally broken. People do not recognize them. So I think sooner or later, I think we'll defeat them. Mm.
And then the questions for you.
Yes, about the PENOP edition. I mean, I worked with Collod and also with a Myanmar writer called Kema, who's based in Washington, D.C., and who's 88th generation. I don't know if you know Kema, but she's a bit of a figurehead for writers in exile. And I actually talked to her now earlier today, just to be able, because I thought if I get the question, I want to know what reaction she's got. And she said she got a lot of reactions on her text because we published her text, and she said. But everyone is now busy with this release of writers, she says. So, and I think it's a little bit too early to say, to know how it will be received and discussed. But hopefully, with a few strategic plants in Facebook, that will be a good spread of it, I think. But it's also been very interesting to work with them because people have been very keen to get their voices out there, you know, and from a sort of literary perspective, it's been interesting to see all the writers want to write about the military coup. I mean, there was a time where we discussed, is it a little bit too much about the coup? And no, it's such a domineering feature of the reality for writers, so we can't not write about the coup. It'd become a bit odd to have a sort of a love poem in the midst of everything. So it's all military coup material, actually, which I think is really relevant and right to do.
Military coups makes good poetry, maybe. Or maybe
strong
not.
Emotions make good poetry. I'd say.
Right. Anyway, we are soon going to wrap this up, and I think it's been a great discussion. But first of all, we will listen to a few words from your book.
Yeah, how interesting. So this book is only a week old or so in Sweden, and it's featuring 2016, the what happened during the run up to the genocide 2017. But because of what happened in February, I've actually rewritten it a bit. And for people familiar with Myanmar, you might know that there is something called in the Burmese and the Buddhist side of the country, not the Shin, which is a Christian state, but in the Buddhist side there is belief in something called Nats, which is a sort of spirit creature. And I'm having a spirit called Amai as one of my characters in the book. Even though the book is very contemporary, I'm having her as a character. So I will read a little bit of her for you. And unfortunately, I'm going to you have to read.
Yes.
But you read Swedish, don't you? You understand Swedish better than you. Yeah, lite. Oh, come on.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, some of it will be published. Yeah, so you can read it. Yeah. Det här är Amai som talar alltså. Det var ett olycksbådande år. Det var ett mörkt år. Det var ett år då planeten var arrangerade så att ett stort skifte skulle ske. Astrologerna i Mandalay hade talat om det i 100 år. Medan västvärlden först hamnade i chock av att britterna valde att lämna EU, befästes tendensen att något var på väg att förändras i världen med valet av president Trump i november. Och i Myanmar, mitt 1000-åriga hem Burma, kung Anavarattas land, hade alla blickar vänts mot landsmodern Aung San Suu Kyi som vunnit valet 2015 och nu tillträdde sin post som rikes statskansler. Ja, över hela världen hade skiftet börjat synas. Sömmar som hållit ihop allt i mitten hade börjat gå upp. Folk tänkte nya och annorlunda tankar åt alla möjliga håll. De som stod på piedestalerna förr hade ramlat ner. Det som krälat i mörker och sump kom upp på land och spridde sitt gift. Planeterna la sig på skuggade platser och de stjärnor som tidigare varit klart lysande låg i dunkel. Det lilla, snåla och oroliga vann mark överallt och det som var stort, öppet och generöst fick backa. Så tillåt mig att presentera mig. Mitt namn är alltså Amai, fru till odågan och mästertjuven Natat Pya. Jag avrättades på grund av min vassa tunga för 1000 år sedan. Jag var en sån kvinna som skulle hålla tyst. Ja, ni fattar. Kungen fick nog. Men jag kom tillbaka. Nu är jag en av de natter som härskar över kung Anavarattas land. Ett land som vi har befolkat i snart 3000 år. Du hittar oss överallt här. I landet som ni inte kan bestämma er för vad det heter. Burma, Myanmar, Burma, Myanmar. På hemsnickrade altar och hyllor, i kokosnötter och grottor, vid tempel för helt andra gudar, vid den vackraste flodkröken och det högsta berget. Där bor vi. Vi flyttar in och blir kvar och vakar över er så länge ni ger oss vad vi kräver. Toddy och cheroots. Men nu för tiden går det bra med whisky och cigaretter. Pengar och sånger och dans. Era mörkaste hemligheter och ljusaste glädje vilar hos oss. Vi letar oss in i era liv. Vi snokar och drar i trådar. Vi pekar ut stigar. Vi bygger trösklar och sätter krokben. Vi förskriver remedier. Vi sätter hjärtan i brand och ger råd och dåd för er att utföra och följa. Så vi beskyddar er och gör motsatsen, störtar er i fördärvet, så som det behagar oss. Buddha, han kom vandrande över bergen långt senare på sin gyllene medelväg. Han kom med sina listor och sina tips och sina avspända, får inte säga lite oengagerade attityd till er och era röriga liv. Som om ni bara kan let it pass. Haha! Sådana är inte ni, det vet vi så väl. Ni ältar och ni är fulla av ånger och tvekan och ni vill hämnas och styra och ställa. Det sista ni kan lära er är att släppa taget. Buddha, ja, han erbjuder 8 vägar till nirvana. Men vi nats, vi erbjuder en. Ta reda på vad ni vill och var beredda att betala priset för att uppnå det. Det ger ett bättre liv här och nu. Sen dör ni och kommer vara döda länge. Så enkelt och genialt. Alla fattar. Men sen i övrigt så är det liksom vanligt Det är inte så hela tiden. Ja.
You are very clever that you choose not as the actor of the book.
Yeah.
Not can be everything. So
Yeah, they're very ambiguous characters.
Yeah.
Do Shin people have nats?
no.
You don't. It's only the Buddha. Yeah,
Of course
You
not.
do.
I think before we became Christian and
Yeah.
before Myanmar became Buddhist, all the Southeast Asians have kind of these traditions quite similar to
Yeah,
all of
spirits,
us.
yeah,
the
yeah,
spirits,
yeah.
yes.
Thank you very much for the reading, and thank you very much for listening, both you who's doing it live and you who's watching this afterwards on the internet, which we have talked about a lot. Thank you to Mikael Hauer, who's in Bangkok. Now you can go to sleep. It's
Yeah,
1
good
o'clock
night.
at night now.
Good night.
And thank you to Lian Sakhong and Helena Thorfinn.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Tack.
My name is Jesper Bengtsson. I'm the president of Swedish PEN. I forgot to say that in the beginning.
Yeah.